In this tutorial, we'll have a look at how to create text animations using custom text animators. Now, text animators are inside the text layers. Here, on the right-hand side, it says Animate. This is where you'll access the text animators, and this button is quite specific to the text layers. So all these properties that are inside the button, you can only use them for text layers. You won't get this with the normal standard layers. If I come out of this, let me first explain to you what the text animators are about. In the previous examples, if I go to this one for example, in order to create an animation like this, let me just go back and play it. In order to create an animation like this, I had to separate every single word into a different layer. So if I go back down, you can see that the first word, standard, is one layer, and then you had the word text as the second layer, and the animation as the third layer, and so on. And this would be the only way of creating this animation if it wasn't for the text animators. Now with the text animators, all of these options here, you can create pretty much the same animation as we had here, without having to deal with lots of layers. All of that happens inside a single layer if you're using text animators. And actually, text animators are a lot more flexible because they give you access to the individual characters, not just words. So let's have a look at some of the basic ones. Let's say, for example, we want the first word, but, to fade up gradually, and the rest to be visible all the time. Now to do that, instead of separating the word into a different layer, I can just go to Animate, and then add an animator called Opacity Animator, because that's what we want to edit now, the opacity of this word. And automatically that creates a new animator, and it calls it Animator 1. And it's a good idea and good practice to rename these animators because you'll see in a second that you'll be creating quite a few of these. And unless you name them, it's going to be a little confusing to find out which one does what. So let's go and rename this to be But Opacity. And you may have noticed that I used all capital letters here. And I do this quite often actually. When I'm renaming something, I use all capitals so that as soon as I look at it, I know it's something that I created rather than something that was there in the first place. Because if it was there in the first place, it would be uppercase for the first letter and then lowercase for the rest of them. If I have it all uppercase, I know it's something I created. So let's go and press enter. And this one now just created a new property called opacity. And the opacity here, by default, controls every single character inside this layer. So if I click and drag this towards left, you see the whole thing goes more transparent. Or if I drag it right, the entire layer gets more opaque. Now you may be asking yourself, what is the difference then between this and the opacity of the actual layer, which is down here inside transform? And at the moment, there's no difference. I could set this back to 100% and then lower this down, and it does exactly the same thing. But the advantage of using a text animator, as opposed to using the opacity for the entire layer, let me just put this back, is so that you can use this thing here called the range selector. Now the range selector, let me make a bit more space for this first. The range selector tells After Effects which portion of the layer it should be affecting. What I mean by that is this. Let's go down. I'm going to collapse the transform here. If I go to range selector and open this up, you see right now the start is set to 0% and end is set to 100%, meaning that the entire layer is going to be affected. But what if I set the end to, let's say, 50%? Round about there maybe. If I now change the opacity, only the first half is going to be affected and not the rest. You can see. And as I'm dragging this end or the start values up and down, you may also notice that there's a little line that's traveling across the text. And that effectively is the range selector. I can do this manually as well. If I have my selection tool selected, I can come down here, move my cursor onto this triangle, and if I click on the triangle, I can then drag this left and right. And if I now move this, let's say, up to here, then change the opacity, you see only the first two words are going to go transparent or opaque. So the range selector sets the boundaries or the limits of this effect, in this case opacity. If you ever lose this line and you can't see it, all you have to do to bring that back is to click somewhere outside and then click back on the words range selector and that will come back again. So I'm going to go click and drag this to the end of this first word. And then I can go and animate the opacity. I can go and set this to be 0 at the beginning, keyframe it, and then go forward to about 10 frames, and then increase this to be about 100%, and here the first word fades in. Let's say now, as the first word fades in, you want the second one, custom, to fall down from the top. Let me zoom in a little bit first. So I'm going to hold down Alt and just use my scroll on the mouse. And in order to make this word fall down, I need to create a new animator. And for that, I need to first deselect everything. So I'm going to go and maybe collapse this, and then click outside to deselect everything, including text layer. And then I'll go to Animate. And because I want the word to fall down, that would be Position. So I can click on this. And I'm going to zoom out again. And I'll go and rename this first. So I'm going to go to Animator 1. And I'll call this Custom Position. And then I'll go to position Y, the second value here, and I'll just drag this left, and you'll see by default the whole layer is moving up. That's because the range selector is set to cover everything from 0%, which is here, up to 100%, which is here. Now, I'll click on this last point, the range selector at the very end, and just drag this towards left, so it covers the word custom. And I'll also click on this one, which covers the word but it's invisible now so you can't see it. I'm just going to drag this towards right, so it only covers the word custom. This way, when I move the position up and down, it's only changing the position of the word custom. Let me maybe start this off screen here, and then I'll keyframe it, and I'll go to the 10th frame again, and then just go and change this back to 0. The initial value here, -180, shows us how far the content is from its original position. This area, the word custom, moved up by 180 pixels. If I play this, you see it's not going to fall down, as the first word fades in. And let's say I want the word animations to scale up. So for that, I'm going to go collapse this again, and then deselect everything by clicking outside, and then go to animate, and this time we'll choose scale. And right away, I'll go and rename this to be animations scale. And then I'll press enter. And I'll just go to the scale here at the beginning and set this to 0 initially. And then I'll keyframe it, and then go to the 10th frame and set this to be 100%. And right now, as you can see, the whole thing is scaling up. But I want to use the range selector to limit this so that only the word animations would be affected. So if I click on the range selector and then drag this to cover the word animations only. Now if I play this, you see only the word animations is affected. And in the next lesson, we will talk about how to combine these properties as well as randomizing them.